Hello everyone. Just a quick heads up before you listen to the story. This is actually a part 2 to a story I did a little while ago. So if you have not listened to the part 1, I highly suggest you do so, as this story will make no sense without the context of the first part. There will be a link in the description to the part 1, and there will be a card in the top right as well. And with that being said, to those of you who did listen to the first part, lay back and enjoy. My soul, for lack of a better word, lived through the cataclysm, while I suspect my body's fate was to be digested in the cavernous depths of the brooding star. I found it difficult to ponder how this could be, how I could be conscious, without resorting to the most horrible mental images, those depicting my brain tissue interwoven with the star's charred, cancerous tendrils, its signals flowing through my exposed nervous system and thus subjecting me to its mysterious will, as well as providing me with sensory input, forming a contrived and illusionary reality. The clarity with which this idea presented itself to me was disturbing, to say the least. I would fain say the stars spoke to me, but I think it would be more accurate to say I suddenly knew things that were previously unknown to me, a multiplicity of strange and obscure facts, some too hideous to dwell on. I knew now that the brooding star was never a star, but only appeared to be one by virtue of how it reflected the sun's light, an illusion much like that which the planetary bodies played on me as a child. Its true form was always that chaotic jumble of malignant limbs, curling and coiling wickedly in the vacuum of space as though it were a virus in a vast protoplasm, changing shape so as to effectively absorb energy from the stars. I also knew that the oracle I murdered was of great significance in the eyes of the star, significance of the sort you might expect a god to regard his chosen prophet with. This fact made me afraid to open my eyes, knowing that I may have assassinated the right hand to the apothic throne and angered the tenebrous monarch itself. Indeed, there appeared to be a monarchy of sorts holding this accursed dimension together. The living celestial body at the head of this monarchy, the writhing scourge whose colloquial name has never been more than a feeble concession to the inadequacy of language, was much older and greater than mankind, as to gaze down upon us with such indifference and cruelty, like a child upon ants. Perhaps we have always been depraved monsters to the ants, while we thought of ourselves righteous and just. Such were my musings in the darkness. I can't tell you how long it took me to finally open my eyes, but I can recall quite clearly the happening that melted my fear away. A raindrop struck my forehead. My eyes shot open. By the heavens, the oracle spoke the truth. I marveled, utterly dumbfounded. I believed at that moment I had been rewarded beyond my loftiest dreams, for I lay in a grassy field under a partly cloudy azure sky that cried tears of joy. It was an idyll that exceeded my personal definition of paradise. None of the ungodly things circulating in my head mattered anymore. I made excuses to shoo them away, calling them mere meaningless aberrations, and giving credence to the radical possibility that the brooding star was not wholly malign. As I stood up, I saw a green hill before me, on top of which was quite possibly the most beautiful tree ever conceived of, its green leaves ever greener than the rich vegetation around them. I threw myself bodily up the hill for such love of what I was seeing. What splendid, fantastical verdure! I had heard stories of the color green, a color too fresh and genuine for the corrupted land I hailed from, but to see it with my own eyes, I could not put the feeling into words if the eternal fate of my soul depended on it. From atop the hill, I could see a small hamlet of 7 or 8 slate-roofed buildings, as well as a rickety windmill watching over it like a silent guardian. I leaned on the tree at the center of this hill and looked up. Apples. So many apples. Bright red and seductively appetizing. I reached out with a trembling hand and almost reverential care, plucked one from the nearest bough and took a godly bite from its crisp flesh. Regret followed. The fruit was shockingly and unbearingly bitter. Nay, it was something else entirely. Something worse. Something that seemed to trigger every safety reflex in my body. Having spit out the foreign substance and dropped the apple on the ground, I saw that it was black and tainted inside. This sight and the spell of dry heaves and violent gagging that overtook me immediately led me to conclude that the fruit was evil in the absolute. Of how long it took me to recover exactly, I'm not aware, but it must have been at least an hour. What does the fruit of this land say of the land itself, the ground that feeds this damnable tree? I thought as I lay there with my back against the grass. My mind began to return to places I never thought it would visit again. The sky darkened in proportion to the darkening of my thoughts, thus losing its heavy blueness. I realized that although the sky behaved as it would if the sun were setting, there was no sun in sight, and no longer a single cloud behind which it could be hiding. My despondent mind then filled with the thoughts of my son. What fate could have befallen him? I wondered. Prior to the end of my physical life, I doubt that there could be a fate worse than living on Earth, a world I assumed was completely destroyed. It was my choice to destroy the world, and while I consider it a terrible mistake for my part, I cannot speak for my son. I know nothing of how he feels, or if he even feels at all, and likely never will know. It soon occurred to me that there was hope, however meager, in the little hamlet I saw from the hilltop. This hope was enough to bring me shakenly to my feet and direct my eyes towards the buildings in the distance. I noticed a certain unearthliness in the settlement that I failed to notice before. Notably, the windmill rotated with an eerie slowness that elicited vertiginous sensations if I stared at it too long. I headed thither out of desperation, and the closer I came to said windmill, the more keenly aware I was of the unpleasant crookedness of it. The stilts that made up its frame reminding me of an amalgamation of wooden skeletons clinging to each other. When I found myself past the corroded iron gate and amid the hamlet's constituent buildings, I swept the area with my eyes in search of life or anything else of interest, a practice I perfected during my earthbound nights of yesterlife. From what I could see, there was nothing but blackness behind the windows and blackness at the bottom of the well, which marked the center of the settlement. It was seemingly a ghost town, a place I knew deep down was incapable of fulfilling any hopes of mine. Nevertheless, I resolved to check each building about me for, well, such as being the theme of my existence. I've never known exactly what to look for, or if there was anything worth seeking to begin with. The first house I entered all but begged me to leave. I was half choked by the wall of musty air that greeted me, which was undoubtedly a byproduct of the black spots I saw eating away at the mildewy rugs and wood plank walls. Had not the twilight illuminated much of the place through the single window in the parlor, I'm sure I would have been in pitch darkness. For it is what I found in the peripheral rooms and closets. Darkness so thick I should have suffocated in it. Nothing useful was found. The next handful of buildings I checked, which included an abandoned apothecary's shop and a cobweb-infested shed, among other more unclassifiable structures, were hardly more welcoming. I fancied I descried the vague outline of a multi-armed, barely human body decaying beneath a sinister pile of dust, but I decided it could have been an illusion, for my imagination grew stranger as the shadows grew longer. The last dwelling I scoured was the largest in the settlement, full of rooms I could not discern the purpose of, as well as a few that were indubitably used for torturous pursuits, judging by the dried bloodstains and spiked draconian contraps. It was with great unease that I found a child's bedroom in the same house. Scattered across the floor were children's toys that, upon close inspection, were revealed to be abused beyond recognition by their owners. Wooden horses were dismembered, porcelain dolls divested of their eyes, all seemingly in sacrifice to a special doll who sat in a dark corner with supernumerary limbs attached to its body and black eyeballs peering out of the many artificial holes in its face. I knew at once that this doll was a vulgar effigy of the brooding star, not at all accurate but indicative of a desperate attempt on the part of its maker to please the star and be freed from its influence. This was inexplicably clear to me, just as a number of other unearthly things were when I awoke in this realm. Around the effigy's neck was a thin chain, and dangling from that chain was a skeleton key. It wasn't until I approached the dark corner cautiously and tore the key from its chain that I realized how repulsive a key could be. Its wickedly gnarled loops and twists seemed impossibly irreverent to the laws of geometry, causing a haunting paranoia to addle my brain, making worse by the countless eyes of that unnatural effigy staring psychotically at me from the darkness. Though everything about the key was unpleasant, I felt as though I would regret leaving it behind. So, I slipped it into my pocket in hope that I needn't catch a glimpse of it ever again. As I turned around and headed for the door, my stride was quickened by a peculiar scuttling noise of an unknown province. I was feeling vulnerable and claustrophobic from the tenebrous atmosphere already, but that shuddersome sound sent me over the edge. I had to get out of there. And get out of there I did. Returning to the open air was not as comforting as you would expect, for there was an uncomfortable absence of fresh air. Specifically, there seemed to be no air at all, only a profound emptiness that refused to console me. By now, my night had fallen entirely along with my spirits. I couldn't decide which fate would be worse, being all alone in this unwelcoming land, or sharing it with the unwholesome beings of the scuttling many-limbed sort my imagination hinted at. Another dichotomy of fates presented itself to me. Madness or sanity? Which would be more preferable? To be at the mercy of real horrors and keep my head, or face illusionary ones and lose it? Unfortunately, I would have no say in the matter, and thus the pondering proved pointless. Wanderingly aimless about the square of the hamlet, I was bedeviled by faint, indecipherable voices. I was on the verge of mistaking them for the wind. That is, until I remembered that there was no wind. I put my ear to the ground many times in many places, hoping to locate the source of these voices, to no avail. Eventually, I noticed that the voices grew more hastily and demonic each time I walked past the central well, and so I approached it. It was obvious to me then that this was the source of the whispers. I put my hands on its somewhat slimy stone rim and peered down it as I did when I first passed through the gates of the ghost town, this time with more intention. I once again saw only blackness, and I smelled metallic vapors reminiscent of blood wafting up from the depths. That's when I heard it. "Father?" the well whispered. Could it be? Could it be my son, trapped in the depths of this wretched place? Or could it be the delusional oracle who ought to be dead? How is this happening? How is this happening? "Son!" I shouted into the well. There was no comprehensible response, only disembodied whispers growing more impatient. The deathly vapors began to affect me in strange ways, making me feel dizzy and listless. A sudden weakness overtook me and forced me to use the well's rim for support. To my panic, this weakness grew worse until, after a minute or so, I was all but paralyzed and entirely deprived of balance, leaving me at the mercy of gravity, and saw to it that I slid helplessly into the well's gaping maw. There was a splash and a number of crunching sensations as I collided with the floor. Indeed, it felt as though I had broken every bone in my body. I opened my eyes to the pool of water I lay prostrate in, which was quite shallow, yet dark as the river Styx was said to be. I lifted my head up, despite the pain of doing so, and made a feeble attempt at surveying my surroundings. The optical sense aside, I already knew I was in some kind of dank chamber by the reverberation and humidity alone. It was with sight that I discerned the rest of the nature of said chamber, and its nature was loathsome beyond words. Cages environed me like the cells of a panopticon to which I was the central eye. Creatures of indescribable repugnance convulse impatiently in these cages, teeth clattering, limbs shaking, their rotted larynxes giving vent to insane desires now that they sensed vulnerable prey in their midst. The abhorrent, torturous wailing I knew would never end until I released these blasphemous horrors from their squalid enclosures to do with me what they would. I recognized at once the holes in the cage's locks, and my hand all but drew itself to the twisted key in my pocket, that I might subject myself willingly to the lesser of two ghastly evils. This reality bears all the hallmarks of a great and terrible thought occurring in a great and terrible machine. The biological machine, that is, the brooding star. But what of the reality I previously inhabited? Was it merely another thought in another machine? No matter. Philosophy will not save me, for I have been hexed with upwards of 1,000 curses, one of them increasing the potency of my memory 100-fold. I would have considered that a bond in my previous life, but here and now, it causes me great agony. Every 7 years I am forced by these things, my savage masters, to relive the horrors of my past, to novelize my trauma, that their pursuit of torture and torment may be immortalized and regarded with favor by the brooding star. All of my trials, the tainted apple, the harrowing effigy, the noxious well, the others I have written of elsewhere, all of it was by design, formulated by the underlings of a veritable interstellar god. I reside on my knees in a room furnished with a stone altar which stacks of grey, sickly vellum, a vitreous inkwell, and a raven quill rest. There are innumerable shelves surrounding me on all sides, shelves upon which the works of my misfortune lie by the score. My painful memories become more lucid with every pen stroke, made worse by the inevitable fact that my future will be just as dreadful, or worse than the days before me. Dread specters patrol the halls tirelessly. Even now, there must be one leering at me from the shadows. I know it. The curses prevent me from falling into a comfortable insanity as the beings about me have, leaving me gazingly, longingly over the edge of dementia. Every second of every moment, silently begging for oblivion. Give me all of your rainy days, O ancient ones, and I'll give you all of my demon-haunted nights. Hello everyone. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. This was amazing, but incredibly challenging to record. I bet you guys noticed the subtle difference in my voice while recording this story, maybe it being a bit more breathy or a little bit more whispery at times. That's because I was just so exhausted. I needed to record this story today as I've been trying to record it for a long time, and you may hear in the background the reason why it was so difficult to record this. My microphone is incredibly sensitive, as I don't have a great microphone at the moment. So with this microphone, any little noise in my background gets picked up. And at the moment, well, I take care of stray cats around my area. I love taking care of animals. I love taking care of stray cats and stuff. And one of the stray cats that I've been taking care of for about 3 years now showed up last night, well, yesterday morning, with a kitten. Barely a few days old kitten that hasn't even opened his eyes yet. And he's adorable, he's very sweet, but it's very difficult to record with him as he isn't often quiet. So every now and then I would be doing a line in this story and I would have to constantly re-record it because of the baby being in the background. So my voice naturally got very exhausted throughout this recording because of that. But either way, I still got it done. This story was super fun to read. Despite the exhaustion, it was just, I kind of got into a flow state and just read through it. This story was very interesting though. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know if I fully understand it, but I'm definitely gonna listen to it a few more times after I've edited it. After my editor has gone through it and edited it. And I'm gonna listen to it a few times and see what it, try to understand it a bit more, because I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really get to fully wrap my brains around it too much, because a big majority of the story so far was just me trying to re-record lines because my baby was crying in the background. So yeah, either way, I hope you guys understood and also enjoyed it, and if you did, leave a comment down below and tell me what you thought. And I'll see you guys in the next one.